January 18th, 2023. And you are watching Direct Line live with our special guest and my old friend and the original Direct Line alumnus, David Shepard, author, Elections of Consequences, A Cautionary Tale. Our hosts tonight are Mark Unker and Jackie Saxon. Take it away, guys.
He switched it up today. I was waiting for good Wednesday evening. I got thrown off. David, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And I think the easy question to start off with is, can you tell us a little bit about your book?
Oh, sure. If I can hold it, I don't know if that works for TV.
Yep.
Elections have consequences, a cautionary tale. Well, the story, it took me 2.5 years to write. A little background about me. I have a political background, but I've never written a book. I'm not a novelist, but it was an idea that came to me because I was blogging, and I'm here in Virginia. So I'm blogging about what's going on in the state, and it's very disturbing over the last many years. And I just thought maybe there's a better way to make my points than just blogging. And I thought of the idea of creating a novel. Now, my inspiration, I'll be brief with the story. When I was a kid coming up in Virginia politics, I read this book called The Shad Treatment by Garrett Epps. He's a liberal professor, but Garrett Epps' point of that book was to capture the period of Virginia political history. And that was in the end of the Byrd era in the early 70s. And so he wrote this novel, and you can kind of figure out who's who in the novel. It centers around the 1973 gubernatorial election between Mills Godwin and Henry Howe. Well, I read that when I was young, and I thought, wow, what an interesting concept to write a political thriller, a political novel, to make your points and to try to capture what you view as what's going on in politics in Virginia. So I started this novel about 2.5 years ago, and it centers on a Virginia governor who gets in trouble. He's a moderate Democrat from McLean here, where I grew up, and his past comes back to bite him. I won't give too much of this away, but he has to deal with a situation where his party becomes far to the left. He's got all these catastrophes, which I threw in, and it deals with how he deals with these problems and how he's really manipulated, not just by his base, but by the woke media and the mob. And so it's how he deals with it. He doesn't really think he did anything wrong, but he's got to toe the line. And the book also includes a beginning, which is an election between him and his opponent, a Republican state senator, Angela Parrish. And she's good. She's just young, maybe not quite ready to be governor, but she runs a good campaign. And they really kind of smear her. There's charges, anonymous charges that come out, just kind of BS, like what we've seen in politics in America. And I just tried to take everything we've dealt with over the last several years, put it into Virginia. So you got your police shooting, you got the scandal, you got all these things that hit the governor and how he deals with them. And it's just really to make my points. And he deals with statute issues. So we have that debate. And I tell a little bit of history about that. And the other thing I wanted to tell is there are political stories in there that really have been handed down sort of generation to generation, which may just die off. And so I try to keep that going. So I tell these stories. Now, I understand it's based in Virginia and you guys are in Maryland, but it still is applicable because I'm dealing with the issues that we're all dealing with. And I think that from the right, we made a lot of mistakes, certainly here in Virginia, but maybe nationally in dealing with the woke and the movement. And so my book tries to address that and maybe give ideas of how we could have done better politically. So I hope that's not too much.
That's interesting. So what would your takeaway be about how to address that?
Well, in the book, they handle the statue issue differently because Angela Parrish and some of the other conservatives have sort of a different take on it in terms of the history and what could have been done. The statue survived in Virginia for so long because, well, the arguments didn't really work. The arguments of, they were secessionists, so we got rid of the statues, or they were fighting for slavery, we got to get rid of the statues. That didn't work. What happened is they vilified them in the sense that they said, well, they're racists. And so then people thought, oh, well, if that person's a racist, we got to get rid of their statue. But it just sort of talks about different ways that it could have been dealt with, and that's in the book. I won't bore you with the details, but I just try to address a lot of these things that have happened, and also the book is kind of funny at times. I mean, I have an AOC character in there who's a state senator who's about as dumb as can be, but they can't say that. Nobody can say that. They have to call her brilliant. And there's a virtue signaling journalist who's I changed names too, of not just people, of course, but papers. So he's with the Richmond Daily Dispatch. There's no such paper, but he's kind of the virtue signaler who's the dean of the Virginia Press Corps. He wants to remain dean of the Virginia Press Corps, but to do that, he's got to toe the line. So he's an older guy, and he keeps making mistakes, politically correct sort of mistakes, and so he has to keep apologizing. And he'll do it. He'll keep apologizing, but so it's kind of
funny.
Let
me guess, did the AOC delegate come from Arlington?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, I talk about typecast, right?
So
well, she's a daughter of undocumented immigrants, and she's developed a real dislike for the country, but she got brainwashed. But the thing about her is that she runs Arlington County, gets a nomination, and then it's tantamount to an election because why are you going to beat her? So it's kind of safe. In fact, one of the characters comments that it's like being a Democrat senator from Delaware. You could say stupid things for 30 years and they're going to get rid of you as long as you do it. So there's certain humor to that.
It's interesting when I was doing my prep work for tonight and doing a little bit of research on your book, when I saw the title, Elections Have Consequences, A Cautionary Tale, I was expecting like a book about Biden or a book about Trump, and we've had authors on before, and it's always been, like Governor Bob Ehrlich's book was like unconventional, inconvenient. It was about Trump, right? And this one, I was expecting some real life thing, and instead it's actually fiction. So can you talk a little bit about what inspired the title for the book? Because certainly at first glance, you're expecting something that's like, oh, well, that could mean any politician.
Well, yeah, I must say in writing, the toughest thing, and I had no idea this would be tough, but it's come up with a title. And I'm writing this thing, and what is the title? And I went through so many titles. But Elections Have Consequences sort of a point. Not that I'm saying that this person is any inspiration in this book, but Ralph Northam used to taunt Republicans. He'd say, elections have consequences. So I thought election have consequences are good. And the point of the book is you kind of realize that it's not just a trite expression when we say elections have consequences, because if you look at the two characters in my book, they're worlds apart. And so in the end, the governor, I guess I'm giving away a little too much, but he drinks the Kool-Aid in the end, and he then responds to that motto. He said, well, as I say, elections have consequences. So it does. But
you talked about it took you 2.5 years. Did you have a publisher in advance, or talk a little bit about the process you had for not just writing it, but also getting it published?
Well, I started writing, and I didn't know necessarily where it was going. I started with, I'll give a longer answer, I guess. I started with the scandal part and the governor part, but he got to be such a sleazeball for me that I knew I had to come up with someone good too. So I came up with his foil, which is a Republican state senator from Prince William County. She's the daughter of the former House Speaker. I made that up. And she's a beautiful woman. She's a Trumpista, really. She's like Trump in a female form, and she's 36. So she becomes the star. So I wanted to have something good and positive in it. And then we deal with the governor guy. But it took me a while. I didn't think it was going to be published or anything. I was just going to give it to friends and family and people I think might like it. But it was just a better idea to get it published and get out circulation, get it out to more people. When I wrote it, I wanted, for a little cachet, I wanted a Virginia publisher. I wanted a Richmond publisher. And I found this guy in Richmond that would do it. Well, at first, I sent him a copy, and he's like, well, I don't know, it's a little long, and it needed to be copy edited, and he was going to charge me to do that. And I said, okay, fine. And I got a copy editor. I had it cleaned up, and I resent it to him. And this time when he got it and read it, he thought it read well. He became, kind of changed his tune. He's like, yeah, I think we can do something with this. And and that's why when you open up the book, and for me, no one else will care, I guess, but for me, I like the stamp, the Oakley Press, Richmond, Virginia, because so much of the story takes place in Richmond. And I know the liberal, like UVA Press or George Mason Press, they're a bunch of lefties. I mean, they would never take this book. But I found someone in Richmond that would, and he's been helpful. He's been great, and I've been promoting it on a shoestring, sort of. I'm going on and on, I know, but I was in Richmond today, and I was taking my flyers, I got my book flyers, and I was talking to people in the legislature, and I think the response was good, especially the Republican legislators would like it. And it's sort of, for me, I look at it as kind of a legacy, because I'm telling a lot of the old Virginia stories, which will be gone. And I just want to kind of leave some of these ideas. And if you read it, you'll see a lot of sort of Virginia history, which is kind of going away. So I wanted to preserve that. And also, I think that the book is a kind of a marker, so that future generations and future Republicans and conservatives can look back and think, what was a Republican thinking during the Northam, sort of this era, when all these statues were coming down, all this was going on. And
have you run into speculate? You mentioned you were down in Richmond. Did people speculate as to who was who in the book, and who inspired, I guess the better way to describe it, who inspired who?
Yeah, they will. When I mention a character's name or two, they kind of get an idea, but there is also coincidences in this book. There really, really are. I'll give you an example. My character, Angela Parrish, she played basketball at Stonewall Jackson High, and so she cuts a commercial of her shooting a basket. You know, I wrote that before I knew before Glenn Youngkin was the nominee, before he cut a commercial shooting a basketball. I thought, oh my God, he's shooting a basketball. And I came up with that. The other thing about my character is I came up with Angela Parrish before, you have Carrie Lake, you have Tudor Hall. And if people read that, they'll think that's who they are. But understand, I wrote about Angela Parrish before I saw them. Right. So there's a lot of coincidences in the book. So when people think, oh, this person's this person, no, it's not. But I don't mind if people want to think that. There's a state senator in Virginia who's similar probably to Angela Parrish, because one thing happens, and I won't tell what it is, but something happens in the book to Angela Parrish. Pretty much exact same thing happened to Amanda Chase. But Amanda Chase isn't the inspiration. I just thought the story was good. And also the thing about names it's kind of misleading, because I just tried to use some common Virginia names, but that's not meant to be someone else. For example, I use the last name Carrico, Carrico, because I have the Supreme Court Justice who swears Norton in as Robert Lee Carrico, and I have a candidate by the name of Bruce Carrico. Well, I'm related to Carricos, and when I finished the book, I realized I have a cousin named Bruce Carrico, but that wasn't supposed to be him. So, and the last story about a name is, I mentioned the governor bribes to get the vote. He gets this guy who's a Hamilton, last name Hamilton. Well, we had a delegate Hamilton here in Virginia that got in trouble, but I don't mean him. It was just that name Hamilton I thought would be good. And in fact, Delegate Hamilton read my book and liked it. But when he got the book, I had to call him and tell him, don't take any offense. I didn't mean anything. And he's like, okay, I understand.
It's a different Hamilton.
Yeah.
Exactly. He's like caveat in the front, or like the one they have at the beginning of South Park, right? Like all fictional, all these characters are fictional, not based off of real people. Yeah. Or anybody based off a real person is all coincidence.
Yeah. And actually, I would say that there's a little of me probably in every one of the characters, except the psychopath, the couple of the bad ones.
Hopefully, right?
But there's a little bit of me, because the dean of the Virginia Press Corps, I make Steve Cohen, who's with the Richmond Daily Dispatch. He's always telling like old Virginia political tales, and that's probably something I would do. And so there's some similarity there, even though politics are very different. So there's a little bit of me, I think, in everyone.
So you said it took you 2.5 years to write this book, right? So, and it came out in July. So that takes you back to like 2020-ish, right? That you really started writing the book. So how would you say that the book changed or was influenced by the events going on in Virginia, by Glenn Youngkin's election and the things like that?
Well, when I say 2.5 years, part of that is I mean, it wasn't straight on. I mean, it was just over that period of time. Well, I guess just to make the timeline clear, I even when I finished the book and finished the draft, we were into Youngkin's nomination and all. So there are a couple things I did throw in later. One is the classic Terry McAuliffe line, parents have no business telling schools what to teach. I did include that. I added that with his Secretary of Education. I put that in. I don't know if there was anything else there that I threw in later, but the interesting is in terms of influencing a campaign, actually, that's the kind of the funny thing about the book is that when I look back on it, I wrote this right before Youngkin becomes a nomination and Youngkin wins. So if you could, and it's about the same period of time. So if you read the book, you can almost compare Angela Parrish's Republican campaign for governor and Glenn Youngkin's campaign. And the difference is that Parrish ran more on cultural and social issues. Youngkin really didn't. But Parrish played up the sports team, girls sports teams. She played that up big time. Youngkin did not really. So that might be interesting for people to read the book and compare those two campaigns. Mine fictitious, but it was sort of that same period of time. So that might be interesting. But I don't know. I mean, I think that my candidate and Youngkin would have been different, though, I guess, ideologically. She was more the cultural warrior. He was not so much so.
But I don't know. It always seems in Virginia, maybe there's a little off the book, but you have this cultural chasm or cultural divide between sort of Northern Virginia, which is very mid-Atlantic in its orientation, and the rest of Virginia. And I over the years, I've talked to lots of Republicans from Virginia who just look at Northern Virginia as being kind of hopeless, if you will, in the wrong side of the divide, and others who've been very successful who kind of understand how they're going to pick up votes there. Where do you kind of come out in that, and what's your advice? Is there advice to be drawn between from your book about how to balance that difference?
Well, it's interesting you say that. It reminds me of a couple of stories that I know people from downstate. They say Virginia starts when you cross the Rappahannock. Some describe Northern Virginia.
I've heard that. I've heard that before, and it's yes.
I once was at a state, and I grew up in Fairfax, but I once was at an event downstate, and I talked to this lady, and she's a native Virginian, and it was at the Shad Blanking, which is a big political event, and she says to me that she was from, I don't know, Roanoke or Vinton, and she's a native Virginian. And I said, I'm a native Virginian too. And she said, well, where are you from? And I said, I'm from Fairfax County. And she looked at me like, that's not part of Virginia. I think she was dead serious.
I'm sure she was.
Yeah. Well, in the Youngkin's case, he ran up the margins big time downstate and didn't get creamed in Northern Virginia. He didn't win Fairfax or Prince William or Fauquier, he may have won Fauquier, but Loudoun, but he kept it fairly close. In my case, in my novel, well, I have the Republican candidate from Prince William County, but yeah, she's more of a downstate type. But in terms of balancing the two, I guess Youngkin found the ticket, which is to be moderate enough on social issues, be economically conservative, which still works in Northern Virginia. I mean, in Northern Virginia is still fairly pro-business. And I think that always keeps this. That's why the state, I don't think, will ever be really reliably blue or lockstep, because you still have a certain amount of fiscal conservatism, not just statewide, but even in Northern Virginia. You got a lot of businesses, you got a lot of corporations, although I guess they're not all that conservative anymore, but you got a lot of businesses in Northern Virginia, especially Fairfax. And we always defeated that meals tax. I think maybe they finally got it through, but all my life they kept pushing a meals tax in Fairfax County. We kept defeating it. I think maybe we finally lost that battle. I'm not sure, but I think there's certain fiscal conservatism, at least in Virginia.
Staying on that topic of Virginia politics, I still find it so interesting to watch what goes on in Virginia, because it really does seem like on a bunch of different key issues, you guys have kind of captured lightning in a bottle when it comes to conservatism, and particularly with your schools. And well, obviously it's stemming from some pretty bad scandal, but everything that's going on over there, I feel like every Republican Party in the country is trying to emulate that. I know that we were trying here. How do we get, even in Northern Virginia, which, like Dwight was putting in our comments, is like the Montgomery County or the PG County of Maryland? How do we get that same uprising from parents saying, like, we need to do something, we need to stand up for our kids, even in some of these super blue counties? Like, how do you see that living in Virginia, seeing that play out in Virginia and being like, geez, other states are trying to emulate this? I don't know if you have a question in there.
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, I don't know how Loudoun County became like the center of the culture war, but I look at it this way. I think the shutdown made people realize what the heck's going on in the schools, and I think a lot of parents then saw that. That was the thing with the shutdown. I don't know. I guess it's just sort of a grassroots thing where enough people get involved. It's a matter of deciding that I'm going to take action. And I don't know the case of Maryland, but I think what happened is when they shut down the schools, parents got to see what the heck the kids are learning. And that's the whole thing with my book. I talk a lot about that in terms of the bad history and stuff is being taught, and all the nonsense that's going on. I don't know. I guess the left just sort of in Maryland and in Virginia and so many other schools, they've just sort of captured the schools, so they go into education. Maybe conservatives don't. It's like the media. When I grew up, the media was always very liberal because, well, that's where they go. That's where they go into teaching. I remember I was working at the polls once, and I passed out Republican sample ballots, and I had a Democrat there. He's passing out Democrat sample ballots, and he went into teaching. And he told me when we were having a conversation about he once was involved in politics and he got involved in politics, but he let it slip. He said, well, yeah, but I thought I could do more good. In other words, advance his philosophy in terms of education. So they've always wanted to, the left always seems to go into that, and we don't. So I think that's a mistake. But I don't know how to necessarily correct it other than just get involved and don't be intimidated. I think a lot of parents may get intimidated and they don't really speak out. And my book talks about that as well, as terms of people are always frightened. And I think Americans fear this more than probably anything else, of being called a racist or called a bigot. Nobody wants that. And they're so frightened of it. And so everyone seems, maybe just at work, certainly at work, they go along. Someone once said, though, with the school boards, what happened is in Virginia, parents know, hey, I'm going to go to work. I'm going to be indoctrinated, but you're not going to indoctrinate my kids. It was sort of a philosophy, and that's what they said. And so, maybe there's some truth to that.
So can you talk a little bit about the reception that your book has gotten? I know you've mentioned before the show that you've been going around promoting it to different Republican groups.
Well, the idea of it, it's only been out since July, so I don't know how many readers I've got at this point. It still takes a while who have finished it. But I have heard some finished it and liked it. That makes me happier than anything else when I hear that. So some so far like it. I think they like the concept of it at least. But I'm trying to get more feedback. I've got 3 reviews on Amazon right now. They're all good, but then I don't know if that's sort of stacked in a way. I didn't do one or ask anyone to, but you never know in that case. The book's not for everybody, though. For most people, the average person probably wouldn't get it or wouldn't care. But if you're a conservative and if you follow politics, and not just in Virginia, but if you're a conservative anywhere and you follow sort of the woke culture, the woke movement in the schools and stuff, that's what my book sort of addresses. So I think people could like it from not just the Old Dominion in Virginia, but you'll get a little good taste of Virginia political history in the book.
It's interesting that we're having this show, and again, the title is Elections Have Consequences, a Cautionary Tale. Today in Maryland, we're having a change in administration. A new governor has come in, and it's a real reminder today about the fact that elections do have change, and they do have can move jurisdictions in fundamentally different ways, even at the local level, can have that kind of impact. Any predictions for where Virginia is going in the future?
Well, I think Youngkin's doing a good job. I think he's good. Virginia, I think, will still be a swing state. I generally think it is. Everyone kept thinking that with Northam and with McAuliffe and then Northam, it was a blue state, and Biden carried it by 10 points. But I don't see that. I think it's still a swing state. And Youngkin ends up carrying it despite, Biden winning. Part of it, though, is, and this is the case of Maryland, because if you think about it, the DMV, we're all pretty much the same. I mean, in Montgomery County or Fairfax County and Arlington County. So we're all sort of the same here. And Virginia has the rest of the state to help. That's true. But the other thing is, we're a company town. Fairfax is a company town, and that's the federal government. The federal government's so big. So a Trump will never really do well in Virginia, because when you talk about draining the swamp, well, where do you think the swamp lives? I grew up in McLean, and it once was conservative, but all these people that were leaking against Trump when he was president, I guarantee you they lived in McLean. So it's a company town, and I think other Republicans can do well in Virginia, but sadly, the Trump sort of brand will not work in Virginia much better than it will work in Maryland.
Well, it's interesting that you classify Virginia as a swing state still, just from what I've noticed. I know it always seems like, and I know Dwayne mentioned before the show that you used to be a YR, so you know how it is, right? That we're always on. It seems like Virginia's always having elections. And I know you guys have special elections coming up from your state Senate.
We have every year.
Win 2 seats in that state Senate, they then capture control there, and they already have control of your guys' House of Delegates, as well as obviously the governor's mansion. So, and then, especially with us moving into having a pretty far left governor take over with an already far left supermajority in our legislature, I think we're also seeing a lot of Republicans who might flee to Virginia. So I think that swing state status, it sounds like, could be shifting further and further red in the near future.
Yeah, I hope. I don't know. It's hard to say. I think Youngkin's doing well, though, so we got a shot there. We'll see when we have the state Senate elections. But it's sort of still that urban-suburban divide, and we still have that. And I don't know. I mean, it's the weirdest thing in my life, because you're having fewer and fewer areas that are kind of swing. I understand redistricting. It's designed that way, but it's almost like residential selection. People say people are kind of moving where other people will agree with them. And and the other thing is, it's almost like, this theory that, if things get really bad, Biden could lose and Trump could beat him. And so, but I don't know. I almost think people are so partisan, so set in their ways that it almost doesn't matter. It's like DC, you see crime going up and all these problems. And I don't know, will it matter? Will people do anything about it? I'm not sure.
There are still people in the middle, and things are so
I hope
closely balanced between the two partisan. Again, there's 2 blocks on either side, as you described, but
well, that's a good point, because if you look at Georgia, Kemp won fairly comfortably, but you see Walker lost, so there certainly were ticket splitters. So,
and I find Virginia politics so fascinating, and particularly also that you guys have this rule that you can't have a governor serve 2 consecutive terms.
Yeah, that's an old thing, because the Virginia governor is very powerful. In effect, the Virginia governor does have a line on veto, has like 4,000 appointments, and so people just thought 1 term's enough, and for any person. And my book talks about that as well. And if you look at the history of that, only 1 person has in the Democratic age has won another term. That's Mills Godwin. But that election, despite the fact that he's very popular and positive figure in Virginia, that was still pretty close, his winning. And so what I said with Terry McAuliffe is, I always knew when he was running, they list him as former governor, and I always knew that's not necessarily positive, because I think people of Virginia don't want 2-term governors, even if it's not consecutive. And I think the default position is, let's give someone else a shot. And I don't know if that's the case. And Maryland has a different tradition. But in Virginia, coming back, I think is difficult. I don't think they want you back. And it's nothing personal, but I think they figure 1 term's enough for anybody. And I've actually changed my view on that. I used to think, well, we've had some good Republican governors. Maybe they can come back and run again. But the more I think about it, I've kind of changed my mind on that. I think 1 term is probably enough, and move on to someone else.
So what do you see then as the future for Glenn Youngkin potentially after he's done in the governor's mansion?
Well, I know I'm a bit of a homer on this one, but I think he should go now and run against Biden. And I think he'd have a real shot. And he's got the executive experience. Um, he would leave the state in good hands with Winsome Sears. So I think it can be done. I don't think he'll do that. Don't get me wrong. But that's what I would say. Or I like DeSantis, but because he's been very successful. But Youngkin is so good. I saw him on with Jake Tapper a few months ago, and he was, I mean, you got to admit, he was good. Tapper kept pressing him, and Youngkin was really good in response. So he's polished. He's good. And not to see like a homer or have any relation or connection with him, but I think he's a very good politician.
No, you guys definitely have a dream team with your three up there. I know that some of my friends and I have talked about, like, Winsome Sears could run for a Senate seat. Jason Miyares could run for governor. Youngkin definitely could. I could see as a presidential contender, maybe in the 24 cycle, maybe in the 28 cycle. Who knows?
Well, there's an expression, strike while iron's hot. And especially that's the case of DeSantis. I remember hearing people saying, well, maybe DeSantis will wait. But why would you wait? I mean, if you got a shot, you got a shot. You're a rock star. And so maybe not in Youngkin's case, but in DeSantis' case, I wouldn't give Joe Biden a potential for 4 more years unless he thinks Trump could win. But otherwise, if I were DeSantis, I'd say I'm going now. I mean, am I going to get more popular? Am I going to become more of a star?
I definitely agree with you now. I think for DeSantis, this would be his year, next year.
Yeah, you got to strike while it's hot. Strike while you're popular. Go.
And I think people, especially after a Biden presidency, are sick of the octogenarian leader of the country. I think a younger face, much like I think was the attraction with Obama on our side at DeSantis, somebody who is in his 40s rather than his 80s, is a lot more appealing at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, could you imagine that? Wouldn't you love to see a Youngkin or a DeSantis going up against an old Biden? I mean, it would just be a slaughter. It'd be a crush. I mean, you'd have someone that can speak, take questions from the reporters, and someone who couldn't.
It's interesting because Biden is older than the baby boomers.
Yeah.
He's the original baby boomer.
Yeah, well, no, he's whatever the hell the generation was.
So what came before that? I gotta Google that.
No, trust me on that. So the baby boomers started in 1946 after World War II, and Biden was turned 30 and was born in 1942. So he's depending how you count, 3 to 4 years older than the baby boomers.
This is ironic. The generation he's a part of is called the silent generation.
Generation.
I
right.
wish he was. Honestly, he should be silent right now. He's got himself in some trouble. So.
Yeah, it's just funny. It's just like, well, I guess not funny, but sad. But I love all the gaffes. They just keep coming. The apparently mispronounced Harris's name the other day. He's referred to as president before.
Yeah, he referred to
he's
Jill
asking where the
congresswoman
who was dead. Is she here today?
Jackie, where's Jackie?
It's interesting. Is it's hard to understand how much of that is baked in at this point. That people just sort of, what for another politician would be disastrous is just taken as Crazy Joe.
Yeah. You're right. It may be baked in. It may be. Or like the market term that's priced in and
priced in. Yes. Well, I'm trying to use a cooking analogy there.
You see what happens when he goes off prompter though, too. I mean, the speech he gave on MLK Day on Monday was a little scary.
Yeah. And then the things he says and he's not pressed and he doesn't take questions really. My book kind of takes a couple jibes at him on that, but because the governor's wife, she doesn't want him to speak. She wants him just to deny, make a statement, and walk out. She says, "Pull a Joe Biden," she called it. But the rationale is so bad, and he never gets pushed. He talks about you could own a cannon, and a cannon's not an arm, and he just so many of these sort of gaffes that he gets away. And then they defend him over the classified documents, and they say, well, it was an office, not a house. And then the next day, they were in his house, in his garage. And they have to keep coming up. The media just keeps coming up with some new protection for them. That
and even they're running out of protection.
Yeah, maybe so, but that's the
So,
only thing that
David,
kind of makes me cynical that they get
do
away
you
with
have
it.
another book in you?
No, I don't think so. I never thought I had one in me, but this book I wrote was just sort of a collection of the things I learned in Virginia politics and the history of it. And I even tell the old political jokes I used to hear all the time. The classic one, and Maryland may have the same one as because delegates don't make much money. And the old joke is when the delegate says he got elected and he said, and my wife asked how much the job paid. And I told her, and she demanded a recount. I mean, they have all these old classic jokes, which I end up telling that maybe they still have in Maryland. In Virginia, we always used to say, I don't always hear this at the legislature, they quote Patrick Henry, probably misquote him. And the quote was that no man's life, liberty, or property are safe when the Virginia General Assembly is in session. So you hear all these old stories. And then the other thing is, some of it's a little obscure, but just to let you know, in the book, I talk about shad planking. That's an old Virginia political event. The shad is a fish that swims up the Chesapeake, and they nail the shad to the board and cook him to the bones melt it all day. And anyway, it was a great political event where the politicians would get together in Wakefield, which is southeast of Richmond, and eat the fish and drink beer and talk Virginia politics. And so I do mention the shad planking a good bit in the book. That was the place to be in Virginia politics. You want to make every April, the first Tuesday and second Tuesday in April, we would do the shad planking. It was put on by the Wakefield Rurikdan Club. They don't do it anymore, but that was our old great event.
Let's bring it back.
So they don't do it. Why not?
Well, they do it, but they don't invite the politicians. Maybe it got too controversial.
Okay. Because we have a similar event in down in Crisfield, but naturally it's crab related. But that's a whole nother conversation about where the crabs come from, because I guess they go back to Virginia, but then they return to Maryland or vice versa on that.
We could do a whole show, I think, on political food thing. I had a friend who lives in Arkansas invite me, an Arkansas Young Republican invite me to, they do a coon feast and they eat raccoon.
You remember Louis Gohmert used to have his ribs. Louis Gohmert, any event what he had, and those came from LBJ. He used LBJ's recipe on that. But with the shad planking, the last point is or on this one was that in the novel, one of the key political consultants, Boyd, they just call him Boyd, but he talks about he loves Virginia politics so much, and the columnist says that one day when you die, you're going to want your ashes scattered on that hill in Wakefield so that for all eternity you'd never miss a shad planking. And so I mentioned that a couple times. So for the Maryland readers, I just say that so that when you read this, you realize, oh, that's a Virginia political tradition.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool. So what else, if anything, do you want to share with us about your book, about whatever else it is you're working on, whatever's next for you?
Well, I just, persevere. I never thought I could write a book, and it's just one thing. I had that idea and I just kept doing it. A lot of times I would do it from 2 to 3 in the morning. I just kept practicing and working at it. And I mean, I'd go to YouTube and look up common writers' mistakes to try to correct my mistakes. I learned about publishing. I just did it myself. And, whether it's good or bad, I mean, it's all me. There's no ghostwriter, no nothing. And so there's no one to blame but me for the book because it was just me. But I had fun. And I think with a book, maybe it's not great. Maybe it's not literature or Henry James, but people can learn something from it. You can get a kick out of it. You'll get a laugh out of it. You'll learn. And that's what makes it worth it. And my view of a book is that if I can get one thing out of that book that'll stay with me, that I'll remember, then I think it's worth it. And so I definitely think you should give it a read if you care about politics, not just Virginia politics, but the woke movement, the liberal bias, and all these sorts of things. And learning about that, you should read the book.
Awesome.
So you were involved with the first direct line. Now that you've experienced the follow-on direct line, do you have any observations to make?
Well,
what makes a great direct line show?
Well, a great host that you guys are, the prettiest and smartest hosts right here, and good guests, which I may not be, but you still can make it interesting. There's so much out there if you think about it. I sort of stopped watching TV for a while, but I've been getting back into watching podcasts and things like that. And I guess what I would say is, have good material, try to have new material, a different take on it, because it seems like so many people do podcasts, and I was thinking about doing it, but I thought to myself, I've got to have the material sort of to do it. And sometimes I wonder, I see some podcasts, I almost think they're just on, I guess, to be on. I don't know. But a good material, I would say, and try to have some good thoughts in terms of something different. You don't want to be like the liberal media where they just repeat each other, You see those loops where they talk about, they all say the same thing, there's nothing different. So.
Well, they all share the same talking points, right?
They have like an email thread, right? Every day. I'm like, this is our take on this.
Right.
Yeah, you keep hearing he's fully cooperating. He always is taken seriously.
Well, you catched on some of the great challenges of it was an office, not a home. Oops, it was a garage. Well, it was a locked garage, right?
The most secure car in history.
Whereas Biden said he didn't leave them on the street. They're in the garage. They're not on the street. All right. Okay, good.
I checked the pumpkins in the Biden household, too, for these papers.
Yeah.
A bit of
there's going to be more, I'm sure.
Well, I have a theory. I mean, there's so many people with this may be off point to the partisan point, but that all over Washington, people are looking in their file cabinets and in the boxes of stuff that they brought home from whatever job they had, looking to see whether or not by mistake they have any top secret stuff, which, as we all know, would be a crime, and trying to figure out what the hell to do with that.
Well, and to leave it in your garage. I mean, when you get home, you bring your groceries in, right? You didn't.
Right. No. And there's no, I'm not trying to minimize anything about it. Not my observation. I'm just saying that there are a lot of people who may have classifications, who may have made mistakes, and they are now realizing that they've got a real serious problem that they got to undo.
Well, my conspiracy theory of the week, because they had one clip they were showing on Fox News last week of one of the Democrat congressmen saying, well, I'm not ruling out that somebody planted these documents. And I'm like, but I'm thinking, he's trying to say, I think, imply that it's the Republicans who planted to get Biden in trouble. Oh, yeah. I think if anyone planted, it's the Democrats so they could run somebody else in 2024.
Oh, yeah, that's a theory.
My conspiracy theory of the week.
And with Biden and his age and his memory, he probably wouldn't remember. I mean, you could probably plan him on him, and he's not.
Yeah, he's not perjuring himself when he says, "I do not recall."
Right? Yeah, because he probably doesn't. Yeah, but I don't know the story, but I keep hearing different things about Hunter Biden maybe renting the place or owning the place.
Yeah, he was renting it for far more than it was worth, I'm sure.
But this shows you the class level of the guy when he impregnates the woman. And then she wants to give the baby the last name, and it's like, hell no, you can't even do that. I mean, hasn't she suffered enough? You think you'd give her that, right?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, David, for taking the time to join us and to come back to Direct Line.
Well, thank you, and order it today if you can.
Yes, please go on Amazon, buy Elections Have Consequences, A Cautionary Tale. Help David out. And join us again next week. We'll be back with another guest and some more great conversation. Have a great night, everybody.
Thank you.